Shalom, this is Joseph Shulam, and we're continuing into the third lesson dealing with the parables of Yeshua Mashiach. The New Testament Gospels have a lot of the teaching and the statements of Yeshua, and a lot of his teaching are parables. Parables are the means by which Yeshua is teaching, and of course during the Second Temple period, Yeshua is not the only rabbi that taught with parables. Our traditional Jewish rabbis that are recorded in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Midrashic literature, all taught using parables because parables were the way that people could say things that could not be said in a gentler way other than through parables. And the parables had some witty points in them, they had some political points in them, they had some sharp points in them, and sometimes they were absurd. But actually from that absurdness and from that hard point in the parables, one can learn a lot that cannot be actually said unless it is said by telling a story. And we already dealt with 2 sessions talking about the parables of Yeshua. And I want to say that when we study the words of Yeshua, the Gospels, we find a very different picture than what traditionally is considered by evangelical Christianity to be the bread and butter, the basis, the foundational issues of the New Testament and of the Gospel. The foundational issues of the New Testament, if they're taken from the Gospels, we find them to be very, very compatible with the Jewish world of Yeshua, with the time that Yeshua lived here in the land of Israel, in the city of Jerusalem, walked the hills of the Galilee, fed people in the valleys near the Sea of Galilee, and fished together with his disciples on the Sea of Galilee, and the Kinneret, as we call it in Hebrew. So today I want to deal with a parable that deals with a part of the culture of the time. We have to realize that at that time, the main entertainment that people had was at home, and it was during the mealtime. The mealtime was not only for feeding the body, but it was also considered a wonderful time for entertaining and for talking and for philosophizing and for learning. It's a great time to learn during dinner. I realize that in our culture today, families meet very little as a whole family to have dinners and to talk about things that are pertinent and that are spiritual and that are building up the relationships in the family, and that are used as means for teaching. But both Yeshua and the rabbis had a lot to do with dinners. And during these dinners times, they sat together around the table. Usually it was a table with 3 legs, like the letter C, but in 3 legs. In the middle was hollow, and then people were settled around the sides of the table. Hollow in the middle so that the servants could bring the food and serve it to the people, all the people around the table. And that each could see each other and have discussions. It was called triclinium in Latin, 3-sided table. So, many of the parables of Yeshua and the stories about Yeshua, he is in somebody's house and eating dinner. This is true in Luke 7, and now we're going to talk about Yeshua's meeting in a setting of dinner and discussing things with his hosts. I'm going to read the parable of Yeshua first from Luke chapter 14, from verse 15 till verse 27. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Yeshua, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Yeshua replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field. I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yokes of oxen, and I am on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. When the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servants, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out to the roads and the country lanes and make them come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of these men who were invited will get to taste of my banquet.'" Verse 25. A large crowd were traveling with Jesus, with Yeshua, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and his sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And everyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." This parable of Yeshua has many, many very difficult aspects to it. But in order to understand it, we need to know the Torah, and a part of that Torah text is coming from Deuteronomy chapter 20, in which people who got married, or bought oxen, or bought a field, or are afraid, are excused from joining the army and going to battle in the war. That is the first aspect that is very glaring to anyone who knows the Torah in this parable. These people that were invited and wanted to be excused from coming to the parable had an excuse that was legitimate for not going to war. But the question that arises here, is that an excuse that is legitimate in order not to go to the banquet? And all of this in the setting of the discussion that was already being held in that same table during dinner between Yeshua and the guest, who said, "Blessed is the man who will eat in the feast in the kingdom of God." In other words, everybody wants to be in the feast of the kingdom of God, but many people have excuses not to come. They have things that are more important to them, that are busier for them not to come. We are going to enter this parable again in the next teaching and discuss the rabbinical implications that come from this parable, and the parable that is parallel to the parable of Yeshua in rabbinical literature and appears several times in rabbinical literature, and enlightens us also about the culture, the time, and the moral implications of the teaching of Yeshua. We have to understand, dear brothers and sisters, dear friends, that Yeshua lived in the Second Temple period in the land of Israel, in the Jewish culture. And the Jewish culture, even though it had influences from the Greek culture, like today we have a lot of influence from the American culture, and even our language has been tainted with a lot of Englishisms, like they say it will not hold water in Hebrew, lo machzik mayim, which is clearly an Englishism, and we have drugstores. In Hebrew, they say drugstore, and things like "you were driving me nuts" are translated sometimes to Hebrew, and they become very funny. The same thing was true in the time of Yeshua with the Greek. However, the main language and the main expression was not in Greek, especially not when it was a religious discussion or in a formal dinner. It was always in Hebrew, and that Hebrew is reflected in these parables of Yeshua. They had to be said in Hebrew and not in Greek. So we are going to go to the second session of this same lesson and open up into the rabbinical literature from the same text in the parable.